Hi, everyone. Just a quick market note before we get to today's interview. Gold prices are now back up after taking a breather following the win from President-elect Trump. Many thinking, well, now that there's euphoria back in the markets, maybe now is not the time I should be buying gold. Well, I'm here to tell you that if you track history, it will prove time and time again that the longer you wait, the more you will generally pay for your goals. So that's why I urge you all to reach out to one of my colleagues at ITM Trading via a Calendly link. You can find that below in the video, and they will walk you through all the fundamentals, the main pillars, the reasons you should be owning gold today. Do it now. Hi, this is Daniela Cambone, and welcome back to the Daniela Cambone Show here on ITM Trading. We are talking Canada-U.S. relations today with a very special guest, as Canada weighs cutting Mexico out of the trilateral trade pact, as Trump has just tapped his pro-tariff CAO for Commerce Secretary. Joining me to talk about this and what relations between Canada and the U.S. could look like under the new Trump administration is Danielle Smith, the Premier for Alberta. Premier, so good to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks, Daniela. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, look, I just saw the memo, President-elect Donald Trump picking Howard Lutnick, billionaire investor, veteran Wall Street CEO, as his next Commerce Secretary. He said in a statement released moments ago that Lutnick would lead our tariff and trade agenda. He basically will be responsible for enforcing the sweeping tariffs that Trump campaigned on. My question to you, Premier, is one, what does this mean for Canada? And two, I know in past interviews you have said you fully, 1,000% back the idea of cutting Mexico out of the trilateral trade agreement. So I want to get your thoughts on that. But first, this new appointment, this new selection, what does it mean for Canada?
Well, I can tell you, I think that the Americans under the Trump administration have been very clear about the direction that they would like to go. I had an opportunity at a dinner not so long ago to meet with Robert Lighthizer, and his view was that the Americans want fair trade, which is essentially buy as much stuff from us as we buy from you. And so if we look at our relationship through that lens, then I think we'll be able to have a really constructive conversation with the Americans when we go into a trade negotiation. We're reaching out through our team to see if there's any personal connection with Secretary Lutnick, but I would presume that he has very much a similar type of approach. And what I would say is that the relationship between Canada and U.S. is already very balanced, especially when you take out energy imports and exports. We do have a pretty balanced relationship with all of our provinces in buying as much as we sell. There is a bit of a difference with energy and natural gas, oil, bitumen. We know that, but we think that there's an opportunity for us to provide energy security for the United States. We know that, especially our province, we have an abundant supply of energy, 200 billion barrels of recoverable oil. We've got 200 trillion cubic feet of gas. We've got ample pore space for carbon capture. And we know that in the long run, the Americans are going to need to have energy security, especially on a heavy oil product, which we provide. It always makes me cringe when I hear Americans talking about maybe they'll have to go to Iran or Venezuela to get their product. And our message is we're right here. We are a great friend, great trading partner. We have already robust ties to be able to get our product into the American market. We want to continue to play that constructive role. And I hope that has some influence on the new administration.
Yeah, I actually read that Canada is the largest exporter of oil to the United States, more than Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq combined. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I would say that is Alberta alone. I mean, we do have other provinces in Canada that also have oil and gas resources, but Alberta's kind of the Texas of Canada. That we have a very similar mentality
right.
Here. We're about cattle and we're about energy, and I think that's part of the message that I have as well when I go to the United States. Part of the reason perhaps I was invited to be on the National Governors Council for Energy Security is because we have over 4 million barrels of oil that we produce alone in Alberta. and the vast majority of that is destined for the United States. It goes down to the Gulf Coast, where of course there's a heavy oil refining capacity. We've got similar trade ties when it comes to natural gas. And so we often, I think maybe it's because we have such a great partnership with the Americans that it hasn't been a flashpoint, and perhaps Americans don't know how strong those trade ties are. But if there is any question as we go forward with trade negotiations, we want to just make sure people know that we have a strong relationship and we want it to continue and grow.
And I want to get back to the Governor's Coalition for Energy Security in a second, but getting back to Mexico in a second, because Canada and Mexico do about 55 billion in two-way trade right now. So cutting Mexico out of the equation now, that obviously places, it creates a big dent. What does that mean? How does that impact? How does that trickle down to the everyday Canadian? What does the future look like for them with Mexico out of the potential picture here?
Well, one of the ways, we have to remember that what was initially called the North American Free Trade Agreement all the way back to 94. So it's been in operation now for almost 30 years. And it really hasn't lived up, I don't think, to that three-way trade. I think it governs the relationship between Canada and the US, which is very robust, and the US and Mexico, which is very robust. But the relationship and trade ties between Canada and Mexico have not grown to the same extent. And I'll put it into context for you, because I think most of the other provinces experience the same thing. Our bilateral trade ties between our province and America is $188 billion. Our bilateral trade ties with Mexico is $2.9 billion. So it's a fraction of the amount. And it's also imbalanced in the same way that the American relationship with Mexico is imbalanced, that we buy well more from Mexico than they buy from us. And I think that's one of the things that we've realized is a flashpoint for the Americans, is that unfortunately Mexico has taken a turn over the last number of years of attracting state-owned enterprises from China, and the Americans are seeing that as a backdoor way of using the NAFTA agreement to hollow out the manufacturing sector by exporting cheap goods into the United States, and they don't want it to happen anymore. And quite frankly, we're harmed by that too. The other thing I'd say that we're harmed by is a number of illegal asylum seekers that are coming across into the United States. We've been watching that. We know Americans are very concerned about that as well. And so we think that the next relationship that we need to have is that we probably need to move to more of a bilateral agreement between Canada and the US. And then each of our countries should probably negotiate bilateral agreements with Mexico that make sense in the areas where we have trade tie strength. But I'm not sure that the trilateral agreement is working particularly well for all of us.
So what happens, Mexico facing this threat, obviously, that they don't want to lose. What happens if they come and say, okay, we won't do any more deals with China. We're not going to be seen as that backdoor to China. Do you believe them? Do you rethink your position?
I think it's got to be both. I mean, they've got to address that, and they've also got to address the porous border as well. I think that both of those are. Again, I take the new White House administration at their word. I think that Trump is very clear about the things that are trade irritants and relationship irritants to him, and I think those are two things that are non-starters. We know that they've already also turned an eye to the northern border, being concerned that there may be people coming across from Canada into the United States, and that's why we also have to take seriously the asylum seekers, and if that's also an avenue. So I would just say, like, Mexico will have to make its own decisions. There are consequences in relationships to actions, and I would say that the Americans for some time have been pretty clear that this has been an irritant, and we know that we cannot sacrifice such an enormous trade relationship and overwhelmingly positive partnership with the Americans by putting Mexico first. We've got to put Canadian interests first.
And on that note, I want to take a step back and see, with the new Trump administration, let's look at what Canada is, possibly facing, perhaps a 20% tariffs. We don't know exactly how that will play out yet, and we'll talk about that. You mentioned it, the influx of asylum seekers, buses of these asylum seekers now headed to Canada. I live in New York City, and it is truth. I see the buses loading up, heading to Canada. So the present government's response, Justin Trudeau has come out and said, everything is fine. This administration has dealt with Trump before. We know what we're getting into. My question to you is, do you feel Canada is prepared for the new Trump administration? What is it up against?
I would say a few things. I would say that the premiers are prepared, and for your audience, the premiers are similar to a governor. So there's 50 governors in Canada. There's 13
Right.
premiers when you include our territories. And we just had a meeting today where we talked about what our joint strategy should be in reaching out to the representatives in the U.S. and the governors in the U.S. and the industry associations in the U.S. that each of us have strong ties with. One of the things we came together with together on the last time we met as a premiers group was imploring the federal government to reach its 2% NATO commitment. This is another thing that we know the Americans care about, that if their trade partners are looking to be free riders on American energy or on American security interests, that's also going to harm the relationship. So we know that we have some work to do on this. And I feel like if we have a combination of demonstrating that we are the answer to not only American security, because we are going to meet our commitments under the NATO agreement, that we also can provide energy security so that if it comes to a point where American reserves decline or the production declines, they can rely on Canada to be able to backfill. If we can provide food security, because we have an integrated food market as well. And we also provide border security when it comes to ensuring that we do not have tens of thousands of asylum seekers that are going through a porous border. I think we have the ability to have a really constructive negotiation with the federal government. But those are the kind of things that the premiers are pushing on. That we have to
Yeah.
be realistic here, and we have to make sure that we're thinking of things from an American interest point of view.
I'm sensing a lot of optimism.
Well, I feel like we've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years, and I always get encouraged when I meet with my fellow premiers about the incredible relationships that they have with their American counterparts. In Eastern Canada, there's a lot of electricity that flows south of the border, which helps to keep power prices lower. In our part of the world, there's a lot of oil and natural gas that goes south of the border, which helps keep home heating prices low and helps to keep gasoline and diesel prices low. When we talk about food, we a lot of the raw product that we produce, we just simply haven't developed the value added capacity to do the value added here. And so a lot of that goes into American production facilities that they're able to do the value added and be able to have cheap food for Americans. So we really feel like this partnership has worked well for both of us. We may be an exporting nation because we can't consume all of what we produce, but we do feel like that balanced trade requirement that the new White House is asking for, we feel like we check off a lot of boxes on that. So we do feel pretty positive that we can make that argument.
You mentioned your province just joined the 12 American states and the Governor's Coalition for Energy Security. You now have a seat at that table. What are you looking to accomplish there?
Well, I look at the formation of that group, and it sounds like it began forming in September of 2024. So it may well be that they were a little bit worried about the continuing Democrat White House and what that might mean to energy production. I think what we've seen with the Republicans having not only the White House but also the Congress as well is there's a huge opportunity for us to make some real strides on developing the resource to a point where it brings prices down for consumers, but then also addressing how we reduce emissions. This is one of the things I've been talking about for some time, is that there is a movement to keep it in the ground, and that is not what we think is the future.
So I just want to get back to potential tariffs. What playing cards is Alberta prepared to deal if you're facing, 20% tariffs here on oil or the energy sector as a whole?
Well, I'm going to be optimistic. I'll tell you what it is that I think that Canada wants. Canada wants a carve-out. We want to recognize the integrated nature of the Canadian and U.S. markets and not be subject to those tariffs, because we really do think that we've met a lot of the requirements that the U.S. has about balanced trade, but also because we provide so much of the feedstock for the value-added industries that go into reducing consumer prices. If I look at what the American administration is looking for, is they want to make life easier for American citizens, and you don't do that by making wood more expensive so homes are more expensive, or fuel more expensive so that everything that you purchase that requires fuel is more expensive, or food more expensive. I think that because we have had this relationship that has developed over many decades, where we have had this integrated market where they buy from Canada the things that they need to be able to provide low prices for the consumers, and they get the value added in the middle, which is also good for American jobs. We just feel like we have a different argument that we can make. And so maybe I'm being unrealistic to think that we could get a complete carve out for Canada, but I would say that that's what we're looking for. We know, for instance, though, that softwood lumber has continued to be an ongoing dispute, and we do have tariffs on that right now. We are worried about the impact that that would have if they continue to add them. We have seen in the past, though, that the Americans, when we were talking about steel and aluminum tariffs, I think what happened is a lot of the American interests came forward and said, "Wait a minute, this isn't going to be good for us to pay higher prices on that." So as we go forward and we on each of these issues are able to demonstrate that there is a win-win on both sides, no one's being taken advantage of, I think that we stand a good chance of being able to argue for a complete carve-out for Canada.
Do you think we could see a revival of the Keystone pipeline?
Well, I would say I would love to see a revival of discussions about any type of additional pipeline options for the U.S. I know that Keystone was a bit of a flashpoint because of the greenfield development is always going to be a lot more difficult than using an existing right of way. But we have approached all of our Canadian pipeline companies and said, if we were to negotiate additional product going to the U.S., what would be the route for that? Could we expand existing pipelines on existing rights of way? Could we do loops? Can we use compression? Is there some way that we would be able to have the least disruptive approach to expanding the amount that we export to the U.S.? And so all of our energy companies, our pipeline companies, are working on that. And I hope that there's some American pipeline companies we can partner with to have that same conversation as well. Because what I've observed with the American market on energy is that we had a real opportunity with Keystone to connect this large production of heavy oil with the largest refining capacity of heavy oil. And it would have been, I think, very good for both of our nations to do that. In the absence of having that particular project, I still think we need to be able to find ways to get more of that down to the U.S. Gulf Coast so that the Americans don't have to rely on imports from less friendly regimes than Canada.
One thing we've covered extensively on the show is Canadian pension funds. And Canada's 8 largest pension funds hold some 2.1 trillion in assets, but only a quarter was even invested in the country. This is according to research by Montreal-based fund manager Letco Brosseau. The so-called Maple 8 devoted just 3% to domestic equities. I've had folks in the mining industry up in arms over this, saying, they've taken the vast majority of this money, 75% of it, and invested it outside of Canada. The mining industry has been ignored in Canada. Any thoughts on investing back in Canada and helping Canada's mining industry here?
One of the approaches that we've tried to take with our pension funds is that we hire the best people who will make the best investments through a lens of getting the best returns for our pensioners. And there has always been this division where they don't want politicians making decisions about where dollars should be directed to. That being said, we do have an interesting investment opportunity in Canada with our sovereign wealth fund. It's called the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. It's not tied to pension assets. And when I look at the approach that other jurisdictions have taken, I think of some of UAE or Qatar or others. They have used their wealth to be able to invest in creating new export markets. I think Qatar in particular, they have built import and export terminals for their LNG. They have a plan to grow that fund to a point where if LNG is not something people want in the future, they have enough dollars being generated so that they can still manage their local affairs. And so I think what you'll see is that we'll take a bit of a hybrid approach. The investment funds for pension have to be a little bit more independent, but there might be a new investment strategy that happens around our Heritage Savings Trust Fund. I think Quebec has a similar type of approach on that. They've been managing a very large fund for some period of time. They own port assets around the world through their pension fund. And so we want to have a constructive discussion about, and I think a rational discussion. I think we've gone a little off the rails in the last number of years on a pretense that the entire world can be run
just a little
on wind and solar and battery power. And I think that reality intervened in the last few years with the invasion of Ukraine, with the unrest in the Middle East, with the spike in prices for oil and gas, with the harm that is being caused to people by inflation. I think politicians have all had to wake up and realize that whatever transition we're in away from emissions is going to have to take place over a longer period of time so that people have the access to the low-priced energy that they need now and the affordable food that they need now in order that they can live good lives. So I think that being able to invest in all of the things that allow for people to live a comfortable life, and that includes all of the incredible amount of mining that needs to be done for the critical minerals and other resources. It means energy, oil and gas. It also means doing food production. That I think is the recalibration that is happening right now. Some jurisdictions are doing it faster than others, but I think the Americans are really going to be able to lead the way in a bit of a reality check.
Speaking about going off the rails, I recently had fellow Canadian Kevin O'Leary on the show in a video that went viral, Premier, mostly for the fact that it resonated with millions of Canadians, his emotions, right? He was speaking of how he's really fed up with the economy in Canada now, with the direction that the Trudeau government has taken, and that the last time he felt proud to be a Canadian was 9 years ago. I cannot tell you the amount of emails, letters I received saying, you know, Kevin really embodied how we're feeling. Even from staunch liberals who are telling me it's not that we've left the Liberal Party, it's that the Liberal Party has left us.
I saw that viral clip.
Hearing? Oh, okay. So I think everyone in Canada has seen it. And it was such a, you know, it just really touched the nerve with so many Canadians. And there's a feeling that the sweeping change that happened in the US is now perhaps going to create a tidal wave in Canada. How do you see it?
Well, I think people get sick of a politician after a period of time. And I think that people are ready for a change in this country. One of the ways in which I think you see that the current prime minister is completely offside with where the general public is was another viral clip that was out there from a session he had in Brazil, where, if I'm summarizing here, but the sense of it was, yeah, I know you're worried about how much it costs to feed your kids, and I know you're worried about the roof over your head, but we have to keep going forward with our climate change strategy. And I just thought, wow, could you be more out of touch with the pain that individuals are feeling? So I think that is part of it, is that when things are going well, and you have the luxury of maybe having additional dollars, maybe there are certain priorities that you can invest in. But when things are going poorly, for the vast majority of your citizens, you've got to put their needs first, and their needs are around affordability. Their needs are around reducing inflation. Their needs are around making sure that they've got good jobs. And I think that clip on its own demonstrated the frustration that Canadians feel with their current leadership. That being said, I mean, things are going well in a lot of the regions, a lot of the provinces. There's some really great things that are happening in our province, in Alberta. People are flocking here. People are creating jobs. People are excited on a whole range of fronts, not just energy, but also on venture capital investment, also on AI data centers, which we think are going to be really big in Alberta as well. And yes. So in some ways, we're finding that individuals, businesses, and provinces are having to work around the negative influence of the federal government. And it makes it confusing, I'm sure, for people on the outside looking in, because normally it's a nation-to-nation relationship. But I think what you'll find increasingly is that provinces don't feel well represented by our federal government. And so we'll be reaching out and doing more to try to make those connections with our American counterparts.
And to your point, I mean, it wasn't all negative, Kevin O'Leary's thoughts. I mean, he did echo that he was so optimistic for the wave of change that he saw in the US and for change to happen in Canada. And he is, like I said, optimistic that, you know, Canada will be back in business. I mean, it's a country, we are rich in natural resources. And there's just a feeling that Canada will get back.
I think that's very true. I mean, when you do have a change of government, especially when you've got a change of government that is more pro-business, pro-investment, that is sort of sticking to the things that matter in the lives of everyday people. And I think that we're seeing that around the world, that there's a lot of governments that are really having to return to those common sense principles. If you get back to the basics of what people really need, job growth and investment, and allowing people to keep more of what they earn. The danger that we have for Canada is that with the new administration in the US, there is a conversation about having a massive cut to corporate income taxes. And that's another thing that we're going to have to be able to keep up with. If we want to continue to attract investment to Canada, I would say that the Americans are now going to be driving the pace car. And that could lead to a lot of change in a lot of different jurisdictions for the better of the people, I think, to be able to keep up with that.
Premier, I hear you are headed to the inauguration in January.
Yes, Brian Mulroney, one of our former prime ministers, was very smart where he situated the embassy. It's right on the doorstep of the capital. And so the Canadian embassy is going to be hosting a number of people so that we can come and watch the changeover of government. It's pretty historic to watch that. The Americans do that in a way that's a little bit different than we do here.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you today, Premier. I have to say, in the aftermath of that Kevin interview, the other emails I received, people were begging me to bring you on the show because they wanted to hear your thoughts. So then when your folks reached out to me, I thought, oh, this is kismet. It's meant to be. That's a gift to my viewers there. I got you the Premier. Okay, there you go.
Well, thank you so much for your interest. I hope that Americans hear a lot more about Alberta, because I think that there's a lot of similarities between our province and some of your American states. And I go down to the
definitely.
U.S. I'm probably going to be down in the U.S. at least once a month for the next while here, because there's a lot of relationships to keep on building. So I appreciate your interest.
Yes, well, hopefully we will meet up here, two Canadians in America. Thank you, Premier. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Daniela.
And thank you for watching. We'll have more great content coming your way, so be sure to stay tuned to the Daniela Cambone Show. And don't forget to sign up at danielacambone.com to stay on top of it all. Thanks for watching.